Hello, my fellow bookish people who are reading about the theatre for Shaketube 2019, or are just interested in the books that I happen to have picked up. This will be a little bit of a continuing series along with my Shaketube videos. This is the month of September 2019, where three wonderful hosts, who I will link down below, are hosting a read-along of Shakespeare's plays. Each one of them is doing a different Shakespeare play each week, posting a video on Saturday for a total of nine videos, and then on the final Saturday, on the 28th, I'll be posting videos on The Two Gentlemen of Verona. And at the same time as this is going on, Kelly at Books I'm Not Reading is hosting a read-along of Tina Packer's Women of Will, following the feminine in Shakespeare, which I looked at and I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that or the other thing. And I was having trouble for it actually coming in to the library for me. And I was kind of iffy on that. I ended up picking up an ebook copy of This is Shakespeare by Emma Smith, and have actually gotten much further into this. Women of Will had just arrived like about a day or two ago, so I've read the first act, though I haven't read the intermission or whatever, the interlude that happens, which is, I guess if I'm following along with Kelly, is a part of that read along. So I'm gonna talk about these two books in this video shortly, at least the kind of the beginnings of them. I'm gonna start off with the one that I've actually read more of at this point, which is This is Shakespeare by Emma Smith. She is a lecturer in English at University of Oxford. I'm gonna put this down. I'm reading it on my Kindle here, but this is my pretty, look, here's a picture for you to look at while I'm talking about it. But yes, it's basically a collection of kind of short essays on 20 of Shakespeare's plays, starting off with The Taming of the Shrew and going all the way to the Tempest. Emma Smith has kind of a good opening chapter of like, what is her Shakespeare book for? Is this a book about how Shakespeare is so important, and the iambic pentameter and the rights of kings and merry old England and his enormous vocabulary? It's like, no, it's not about any of those things, and many of those things are either wrong or misleading. This is about, she puts it, the artistic and ideological implications of like the silences, the inconsistencies, and all above the kind of the gappiness in Shakespeare's plays. How there's a lot of stuff that Shakespeare doesn't put in these plays, that he leaves it up to the probably artistic director, the casting director, who's there's no physical descriptions of like, what does Hamlet look like? Does Hamlet look like Mel Gibson? Does he look like Kenneth Branagh? Is it a woman you could put in that position? You get a lot of, or is it, does it have to be a white dude? Does it have to be done in like, British English, or could it be done by a Canadian, or by to pick an example, or all the Russian versions of Hamlet. It's a very sparse stage direction, so that gives there's a lot of there's a lot of kind of gaps, like how are you going to stage these conversations? I talked about Twelfth Night and how one staging of a play had two men having a conversation where it looks like they just kind of gotten out of bed with each other, and kind of giving it that kind of push, but just all that stuff. And probably most important of all, the sort of the conceptual and ethical gaps that Shakespeare has in his plays, stuff about like religion, politics, power, gender, kind of what we're becoming the kind of a new modern in Shakespeare's time, of the Renaissance, of the birth of kind of humanist modernist thought, with kind of the old structures, the old traditions, and how these butt together, and how Shakespeare has a very much a way of being neutral, or of presenting a lot of stuff so that plays can get, you can take a look at a play and think this is an anti-war play, or this is a play that you put on because we're threatened by war and we want to rally the troops. And indeed, when you stage Shakespeare plays, this is more me talking about stuff, I'm always struck by how people will just cut things like, okay, that doesn't fit my conception, so I'll just cut this out of the play for this run. And indeed, there's a lot of evidence that Shakespeare was continually reworking his plays as he went along. Like there's many different versions that he's collaborating with actors to kind of come up with stuff. And indeed, every new generation seems to collaborate with Shakespeare's text to come up with something that we're all able to kind of fill in new stuff, which continues to make Shakespeare such a vital guy. Emma Smith talks about how, these are actually incomplete and unstable works. They need actors, directors, the audience, or readers, and they're all readers. I mean, my hat's off to actors who, on a beat by beat a moment have to kind of come up with their interpretation of how am I going to read this particular line. As a reader, you can just kind of go la 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 la, but as an actor up on a stage, you have to make some sort of sense of this. And I mean, indeed, there's even that thing of our acting style nowadays is a very psychologically realistic acting style, and that it's probably infused its own meaning into Shakespeare. Whereas you think about kind of older acting styles, that might make for a very different kind of Shakespeare. And I think about like very much the thing of Emma Smith is a lecturer, is an academic. She is not primarily a theater person, which we'll get to Tina Packer, who very much is that kind of person and has to make those on the ground decisions. But at the very end, like Emma Smith says, like, this is a book for adults. This isn't like we're not going to make Shakespeare made simple. Shakespeare is complex, but not like complex as in, this is difficult or hard, because there's one sense that Shakespeare is very simple. You can go to a Shakespearean play and they can just put on a show and you just get caught up in the emotions. People think, like King Lear is so hard. King Lear is, above all, I think of Lear coming out on the stage carrying his daughter at the end, and it's not intellectual that's happening to me. It's the reverberation emotional, and I mean that's probably my Shakespeare maybe is more emotional than somebody else's who can kind of look at it in a much more detached manner. But this is Shakespeare by Emma Smith, just the beginnings of something like The Taming of the Shrew. At the beginning, she talks about Kate or Catherine. There's a questions of like, is Kate the name that the man who's trying to oppress her in this play gives her? And you can look at Kate as, she's feisty, independent, maybe lonely, misunderstood, or you can look at her and think that she's strident and antisocial and needs to be tamed. And like at the end of the play, is she kind of broken under the wheel of kind of this patriarchal thing, or is she ironically and unabashedly preaching on a interdependence of a husband and wife in cooperation with that husband to win this big wager that she's going to share in. So just as an example to start. And one of the reasons I made a point of just mentioning The Taming of the Shrew is because in the next book, Taming of the Shrew, comes up. That's Women of Will by Tina Packer, a 2015 book, which is very much more about how, by the thesis, and this book is, Emma Smith's, each individual chapter kind of looks at a different thesis, a little sliver. She's saying like she's in no way trying to explain the whole play or even come up with a definitive interpretation of the whole play. She's looking at one thing and saying, what kind of questions does this ask? The Taming of the Shrew maybe is about like, what is Kate's position? I mentioned in Twelfth Night one where she talks about this character Antonio and what is his purpose in this play and what might the gap be there at the end where Antonio is very purposely on stage but isn't given any lines, and that being like just the economics of putting on a play, that is a big thing. Now, this is a whole book which is one big thesis, which is the idea that following Shakespeare's plays chronologically, you will be able to trace Shakespeare from thinking of women as merely objects or merely as kind of pieces to push around, to going into the very later works as complex, rich human beings that have meet him. Like she talks about the through line of this of the struggle in Shakespeare's plays, of his relationship to women, what they meant to him in his imagination, and how much they took over his creative mind and where they guided him in the end. Now, I have actually gotten a chance to watch Kelly at Books I'm Not Reading, her video about this, and she made the very good point that we don't really know for any certainty what the chronology of Shakespeare's plays. We know very little about Shakespeare, and we don't even really have it kind of hammered down the dates. Maybe in general terms, but even then, you get all this scholarship. In Women of Will, at the beginning here, you do get the sense that, well, we're going to make interpretations of certain plays, so it's going to fit this thesis that he didn't know much about women at the beginning of his career, and by the end he had a much more richer, fuller understanding. I think she talks about, like, he wrote like a woman. He became a woman imaginatively, in a sense, which is provocative thesis. Now, she does talk about Taming of the Shrew in here, and because of her thesis, that ambiguity that Emma Smith was talking about, of like, well, Kate could be either of, she could be shrill and strident at the thing, or she could be feisty and independent at the beginning, is kind of lost. It's like, no, this is a Shakespeare who only knows women, doesn't know women, so she's shrill and difficult and just needs to get tamed, which is unfortunately makes for a flattening out of characters at the beginning. It's going to make for maybe more of a flattening out of characters at the beginning of Shakespeare's career. It's one of those things where it's interesting. Tina Packer, as Kelly says in her video, is a very experienced, sounds like an amazing director, actor of Shakespeare. She has done a ton of that. And I think about that as an actor has to make decisions. You can't play it as both. You can't play it as feisty and independent or as shrill and strident. It's like, I think you'd have to make a decision one way or the other, where someone like an academic could say, well, it could be both. It could be both. Trying to do both interpretations on a stage would fall completely flat, would be a bit of a jumbled disaster. So I can see, as an actor, as a director, Tina Packer has to make a decision, has to come up with her interpretation. And it seems like she's found her way into the female characters of Shakespeare this way. She's said, like, well, this is how I see it. This is how they develop over time. We're giving little things, but she's got her thesis and she's going to kind of stick to it, which I can see being really great for a stage play and like make some very provocative decisions. Like her Taming of the Shrew, it's a misogynistic, nasty play. She has her, I have seen a clip of the stage show that she actually made of also called Women of Will. I saw like a clip of it, and it's like, her Kate, her Catherine, is being led around by, like, is collared and being led around by the dude who's taming her. Of course, I'm not reading that play at the moment, so I can't remember his name. But it's like that's a strong decision, and it's like that would be awesome to see on a stage. That would be uncomfortable, and it would be interesting. In a book where I want to kind of, it's one of these things of like, I think I'm going to value that reading this. But I'm also going to sort of take everything she says with a grain of salt, in the sense of, like, she says things as again, Kelly said, because I'm going to follow you, Kelly. You sucked me into this read along. I'm going to follow her, but I'm going to remind myself that she's coming from a very definitive area, the definitive viewpoint, which can be sometimes can be limiting. It can be like, she herself, Tina Packer herself, says very much, look, I am looking at things from a certain slice. I am not saying this is all that there is of Shakespeare. I'm not saying that this is the only interpretation even maybe of Shakespeare's women. I'm just saying that this is where I'm coming from. And I think I'm going to try and keep it from that point of view. There's also a thing of she's talking about Shakespeare and what's in Shakespeare's mind. She's talking about his experience of how she thinks he developed, and making kind of definitive statements on that. And it's like, we know very little about Shakespeare, and to kind of make it kind of a biographical that way, maybe helps, as if, like, she's one theater hack, and she's talking about another theater hack, and that's Willie Shakespeare. And so she's going to say, this is what I think he was doing. But I think it's good to keep in mind that all we do have are the plays. All we do have is the text that we are given. Emma Smith definitely is coming from I'm not going to here to tell you about Shakespeare. Everything that could be said about Shakespeare, anything that's been discovered, has already been discovered and said. This is strictly me reading the plays and trying to say, look, here are some weird questions in here. Here are some weird inconsistencies. Here are some big gaps where people get to make decisions. And isn't that interesting? Isn't that where these plays live? Where this is like, oh, he must have done this, he must have done that. Kelly talked about the is it, oh God, what do they call them? Intermission, the plague years. And it's very much, there's the interlude, the plague years. And apparently it's talking about, like, well, what he must have done during that time. It's like, you get all that sort of stuff, and it's like, it's like you're filling my head with supposition, and I don't want to have that supposition get muddled in my already muddled head with maybe just the bare facts that we know, and get in the way of I feel like maybe that stuff is going to be used in the service to try and tack down her thesis, but I don't want my reading of Shakespeare to get tacked down. I want my reading of Shakespeare to try and be as living as I get to make my own choices, I guess is what I'm saying. So yes. So I will leave a link to Kelly's video about the first act of Women of Will. I will now try and follow along. This is my last Shakespeare video of the day. I promise. This is I'm straying into Steve Donoghue territory here, which is kind of insane for a man who wears pants. You have to not wear pants if you're going to be Steve Donoghue. And I think there's a few other requirements, like you only sleep like 10 minutes a day, and it takes you 20 minutes to read a Shakespeare's play. Probably took you an hour to read the book if you read the book, Steve. And that's not me. So yes, I'm going to follow along. Okay. Back to it all. I'm going to follow along, and I'll read this. And this is the Emma Smith book. This is Shakespeare, is handily very kind of subdivided into separate plays. So I should be able to just sort of pick out what plays of hers, what plays we're reading, and then read that chapter, which will make that much more manageable. Though I guess theoretically that means I could be reading 3 chapters of her and only have 1 chapter of Women of Will a week, which would be crazy. The other actually handy thing for Emma Smith is that she has a there it is. She has a podcast. Emma Smith has a podcast from a while ago, but I have a feeling this is a podcast that was basically how she worked up her book, This is Shakespeare. It's called Approaching Shakespeare, and I'll leave a link to that down below, because she's gone through all the different plays. And interestingly enough, if I clicked on the Twelfth Night podcast, and it was basically her thesis, her little slice thesis of Twelfth Night that is in her book. So if you don't have time to read or the money to pick up or get it from the library, you can always check out the podcast on a particular play, which I kind of find useful as a way to try and get as much information into myself as possible in this I'm getting as much Shakespeare in my system all at once as possible. And definitely check out Kelly at Books I'm Not Reading, a very able and friendly and accessible person to listen to about her interpretation of Shakespeare. She's Kelly. You're really good at this. Don't all this. You have to be a Shakespeare expert. We're on BookTube. We don't have to be experts on anything. We don't have to be right about anything. We can be gloriously wrong, and we all have our bizarre little theories, and it's just entertaining to watch. So definitely check her out. Check out all the fellows who are doing the plays. That's Steve Donoghue, that's Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse, and Lukas at Totally Pretentious. They're all linked down below. All the plays that they are doing are down below as well. And yes, please, if well, I mean, you're watching a long ass video of me talking about Shakespeare books. So if you're interested in that, you'll probably be interested in actually listening to people more knowledgeable and eloquent than me talk about the plays. All right. Oh boy, more videos later.